Before the film came out, there was unending praise for this fat Asian bitch, because apparently being the first fat Asian bitch in a Star Wars movie means you're automatically a good actress and have a pivotal role. The fat Asian is called Rose, and she is the new Jar Jar Binks of this story. She offers so little of value that if you took her out, it would honestly just make the movie so much better. Her role is so insignificant and stupid that I dearly hoped that she would die. I have never seen such a bullshit nonsense character since the Robo Girl from Destiny. She had no right or reason to be in this film and only served to pad out its length in a throwaway subplot that ended up being totally irrelevant anyway. For all of that, I could either forgive or at the very least ignore to some extent if we went issue by issue. The thing that truly, dearly pisses me the fuck off is what they did to Luke Skywalker, the lore, the world, Snoke, Rey, Kylo Ren, and Leia. Kylo Ren changes his mood in every other shot. I forgot how many times he just flipped his personality throughout the course of this movie. He is such an inconsistent, badly written character that it almost makes Rey look good by comparison. The character himself is so unrelatable, so utterly irredeemable and pointless, that they may as well just kill him and ended the series here.
Alright, this is a tough one, so I'm going to try to parse through what Wolf has been saying carefully. This is only a small snippet of his larger Last Jedi review, and believe me, this is honestly him at his best, because he doesn't really have much of an intellectual argument. It's basically very emotional. He just does. He just says, fuck Disney a lot, fuck Last Jedi a lot. Yeah, just like, okay, I could play the clip. It just isn't, I think, worthwhile to keep going through that. But he does bring up some issues, so let me deal with the second half first with Luke and Kylo. And then I'll deal with, I think, the more difficult issue of Rose and Jar Jar. Well, with Luke and Kylo. Now, I'll say my own, again, personal opinion. I do think Adam Driver did a good job, but I did find the performance pretty chaotic and all over the place. But Kylo's consistency as a fictional character, in terms of what he's saying, he's supposed to be inconsistent, right? He almost kills Leia, but he doesn't. He's clearly deceiving deceiving Rey in order to use her to destroy Snoke. I think that was pretty obvious. So his inconsistency is him just manipulating other people to get what he wants. Now, in terms of what he wants, yeah, he is sort of a weird emotional character where we don't know what he wants. He seems to want more power. That's the only consistency from TFA to TLJ. But what does he want to do with the power? He seems to want to recreate himself, etc., etc. Yeah, it's sort of vague. But now as far as Luke goes, and this ties right into Rose, is that I don't see what is happening to Luke as being caught up with what's happening to Rose. I mean, it's not like we get rid of Rose, we get a better Luke. Or we keep Luke, therefore Rose will have to be, elevated. I don't see that occurring at all, even in the fiction. I mean, what happens in Canto Bight is tied to the Luke story because she helps inspire the children, which he, is misidentified as slaves, but these servant children help them out. They join the Rebel Alliance, and they become personally inspired by Luke Skywalker. And people are sort of puzzled by what happens at the end. It's actually really not that hard. It's just an old cinematic technique that he used a time jump. And it's actually been used in Star Wars before, so it's not out of canon with Revenge of the Sith. We go from Anakin becoming Darth Vader, and we have a huge time jump where he's already seeing the Death Star being constructed. So clearly, again, I understand, Wolf doesn't really know film. He doesn't really know cinematography. He doesn't know film history, so he might have missed that. But yeah, there's just a subtle time jump. So how did the kids find out about Luke? Information spreads in this galaxy. That's not hard. We assume either months or maybe a year has passed, and they found out about, Luke sacrificing himself to take down Kylo. Now, I can understand you say you want Luke to have a more glorious or heroic ending. That's fine. I agree with that criticism, but for what the story was trying to do, it was a pretty good version of Luke. Now, you want him to be a little bit more glorious. Mark wanted that, obviously, but listen, Disney's a major corporation. It just wants profits. If you demand hard enough and strong enough to get a Luke Skywalker story where he destroys the Empire with Han Solo at his side, it's going to happen because Disney only cares about money. But in this case, for this trilogy, they wanted to do something else. But believe me, if you want a pro-Luke film badly enough, they'll get the message and they'll put it out there if they think they can make money. But let me turn to Rose, because I do think it is an objective fact that at least a part of the fandom, and there's no denying it, really, really despises her. There's just a lot of, indexes we can use, indices, or whatever the term you want to choose, to suggest that she is not beloved. She clearly is on par with Jar Jar at that respect in terms of the intensity of hatred. But here we are thinking through his criticism of her beyond, the racism and all that kind of stuff, which is definitely there, is that, well, she's just badly written. I mean, you would agree that she's badly written, wouldn't you? Well, I would agree she's badly written, but again, the argument here is contextual. I mean, there's a lot of badly written characters in Star Wars. I'll just take one I do like Jango in the prequels. I really liked the character. I really thought it had a lot of potential, and then George just decided to kill him off. Now, I understand what he was doing was trying to set up this kind of structural pattern with Jango to make sure all the villains got killed, right? The only reason the Emperor even lives is so that he can die at the end of the second trilogy. So I understood what he was doing. I didn't like it. I thought he had a good character and he just destroyed it for no reason, but I understood as a storyteller, this is what he wanted to do with that particular story. So I'm not too upset about it. But I do regret that Jango was not, given more to do. So there we are. So it's not a matter of personal biases. I definitely have characters I wish they did more with, were written better. But different creators will have different ideas. Ryan was just not interested in doing a lot with Snoke. He just wasn't. With Rose, I think he did a pretty good job. But was it the best job ever? No, it's not a perfect film. It has a lot of flaws. But I thought in terms of what Star Wars is, which it is, I mean, you want to avoid this, but it's a fairy tale. Now, me, personally, I prefer the work of David Cronenberg. I mean, I think in terms of this kind of field of fantasy, I prefer that kind of take on fantasy. I don't even like David's work, but I appreciate what he's trying to do. In terms of looking at mythology from his perspective, I think I can learn a lot. I don't agree with these films. I don't like the films. I don't love them, but I do think as films they're stronger. But I do appreciate what Star Wars is trying to do within the fantasy genre. Its fairy tale is much more light. So again, honestly, if you thought Kylo was in danger of dying, you're a fool. You're not paying attention. The reason Rose can magically, go on those horses and go through that rampage is because that's a part of the genre, right? Small, tiny women have a huge amount of power in fairy tales. It's a fairy tale. Emotional teenagers have extraordinary powers in fairy tales. It's a fairy tale. Now, I understand that from you growing up, you didn't want to see it that way. You wanted to see it as a more gritty, masculine, guys just beating up guys kind of fantasy, but that's not what Star Wars ever was. I mean, this is on record. Like Lucas has said, listen, episode 1 is about Padme's story. It's about a woman's story as a queen. It's about how is she going to defend her, planet against this invasion. Now, you can violently disagree with that. Just like you can violently disagree that they finally decided to have an Asian woman as a major character in Star Wars. What you cannot deny is that Star Wars, in its very DNA, is heavily influenced by Asian culture, by Kurosawa, by Japanese cinema. That's not something we can argue over. That's there. The fact that that Asian influence is much more prominent in The Last Jedi is, it's inevitable to use a Thanos quote. I mean, that was always there. If you didn't know that, if you don't understand how Star Wars is influenced or has a background in Japanese or French cinema because you don't know those languages, you don't know those cultures, well, that's too bad. I mean, that just shows you're not competent as a film critic. But as a fan analyst, I do appreciate, Wolf's Rage because it is an indication of where the fan base is, and I think that's something you should definitely look at and respect. However, what I don't respect or want to look at is, incomprehensibly illogical arguments. Kylo being inconsistent is a part of that story. Rose having those, magical moments is a part of that story. If you don't think that story was done well, I could agree with a lot of that. However, within the fantasy, fairy tale genre, it did what it was supposed to do. Do I wish it was more rigorous? Sure. But that's an issue with all Hollywood films. That has nothing to do with The Last Jedi. This is a bigger tragedy of how Hollywood productions are made. I think the deeper irony for me is that given the contextual factors, given the demands of production, The Last Jedi is judged a pretty good film because of those problems within Hollywood production. Those things are just going to turn up. Of how do you make these scenes, last? How do you get film? How do you pay for all these people? How do you get the locations? Those are real realities when you do a real film. You can't do whatever you please. You can't write whatever you want. You have to deal with the scripts and the actors and the things you have before you. I mean, again, I hate to be the guy to say burst your bubble and be like, live in the real world, but that's the reality of it. That's the reality of the prequels as well as the original trilogy. They work within a real history of real production dilemmas. The task of the critic, if you are a real critic, is to somehow take both those things into account. Like, okay, yes, real people have to make these things for real money, but I still expect the story, characters, and, narrative logic to make sense. But I understand it will not always make sense because of the demands of production. That's what a real critic does, is to have a balanced approach. I would judge this as really unbalanced. Just saying she's Jar Jar does not say anything. It does not explain. To me, the right criticism would be this, that the problem with Jar Jar is he was used way too excessively, even in George's story. Rose, I think, was used more moderately. Now, you could still say they're both bad characters or not well done. I would agree with that. But for the story they were telling, in one place it was appropriate, TLJ, in one place it was inappropriate because it was just too excessive, even in that piece of fiction. And that's a correct criticism to have of those two characters. But just saying, the fans hate them, therefore they are bad, or I don't even like the way they look, doesn't make sense as an argument. It's just, that's a preference of certain fans. It's not telling us anything deep or interesting about Star Wars as a mythology or as a cultural product. And that's my take on it. But again, this is a much more personal, less analytic take because, again, this is a very difficult issue because it does involve, your own personal biases about how you do feel about these characters. And yeah, I have to be on board. I don't like Jar Jar very much, and I think Rose is okay, but she's definitely not my favorite. But I don't think in terms of what the storytelling was demanding in those respective films, they're quote-unquote bad. They were just characters made for those stories. They could have been better, but given the realities of how Star Wars is actually made, I think they did okay. Again, for what they were done for. All right, this has been Star Wars Analyzed on the first part of Wolf's criticism of The Last Jedi. I will get to the second part and play more of his clips and quotes just to get a full understanding. Star Wars Analyzed on criticism of The Last Jedi. Thank you for listening. If you like the content, please like and or subscribe. Please be safe. Thank you very much.